of the Brazilian shirt name podcast. The legend Dino is all booted and suited, no doubt, because you got big things to talk about later on today, mate.
Yeah, suited and shoed, please. Can we remove the boots from this equation?
So is it the green suede shoes?
No, it's not. No, so they're black leather, so you can step on them. But you can do anything, including step on my black leather shoes.
No, I will step on them, don't worry. And the reason why I ask is because we've got a genuine pop star with us today. And we know a friend of the podcast as well, from the glorious group, The Farm, who gave us All Together Now, which is one of the great football songs. You can't argue with that. Telling you about the history of football more than anything else. Pete Hooton, welcome back.
Hello, Dotun. Pleasure to be back, yeah.
And a red through and through, I forgot to mention.
Yeah, season ticket holder, yeah. And also recently been elected the vice chair of the Spirit of Shankly.
And once upon a time, a member of the Khmer Rouge as well, I understand.
That's right. We can go into that, but I was banned from all Liverpool publications and media during the dark days of Hicks and Gillett, yeah.
And well, that carried on through to the slightly brighter days of John Henry, would you say, or Fenway?
Well, they haven't phoned me that often. I still do bits and bobs for them, but I think, I think they tend to go for more ex-footballers now, and there's quite a few of them, isn't there?
Yeah, although the conversation we're having today is more about supporters, I'd have thought, than ex-footballers. Supporters and a certain
supporters
manager.
and maybe owners as well.
Owners, obviously.
Yeah. Well, this is where I really want Pete to take this conversation, but let's get into it.
Well, as we always do on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we look at an iconic game from some time in the past. As we speak, it's the beginning of the season, first game done for most of the clubs, and we're talking about a first game of the season match between Liverpool and Arsenal, 15th of August 2010. Arguably, Pete, what was going on the field was overshadowed by what was going on in the background off the field.
Completely overshadowed, yeah. I mean, there'd been Hicks and Gillett had been taken over the club in February 2007. And then the campaign against them really started taking hold. About 2008 was when the Spirit of Shankly was formed in January 2008. So we've been in conflict for 2 years, and there's some hilarious quotes off the owners and some really funny incidents in the background. But at the time when Hodgson took over, they were still in charge, of course, and it wasn't until October 2010 when they lost the court case and Fenway Sports Group took over. They were, of course, New England Investment then, I think they were called then.
Yeah, so that gives us a backdrop as to where Liverpool had come to from the days of Shankly. Essentially, had come a long way from that. What essentially were fans against the owners about? What was their beef?
Well, you've got to remember that Hicks and Gillett came into a lot of fanfare. But at the time, it was DIC, Dubai Investment situation. They were about to buy the club. And then Hicks and Gillett came in. And David Moores, who was the owner at the time, and the shareholders decided to go with the higher offer. Slightly higher offer, not that much in it, not compared to today's offers for football clubs. But at the time, the fans mainly welcomed them with open arms, really. And in fact, we played a Champions League final in Athens 2007 against Milan. And a few weeks before that, they were visible in the city centre, and they were getting heroes welcomes. It was like, I mean, I was always dubious about them because I'd done a bit of research. All it took was a Google research. Because Hicks had in the past said, we buy companies and then we sell, we buy them cheap and sell them on high, and it was a bit like, the 70s when you had Tiny Rowland and people like that, So I was a bit dubious, but they did get a lot of praise from the fans, and it wasn't really till Rafa Benitez started briefing journalists saying these have put debt on the club. They did exactly what they said they wouldn't do. They wouldn't do a Blazers type buyout, but they actually had. It was a complicated financial arrangements, but it meant that we were paying big loans off debts, which they said they weren't going to do.
Is the moment that the train runs out of the station, is that Abramovich coming in? Because it seems to me that changes the entire finances of the thing. Completely. How are you going to compete?
Completely. And that's what, David Moores was in a way an old school owner. He was a fan. He inherited the club, by various means. And he was old school. But I think he looked at this financial situation and thought, I can't compete. And he genuinely wanted the best for the club. Unfortunately, they said they did due diligence, but we'd all seen that Hicks had owned a club in Brazil, I think it was. There
was an attempt with a few. It didn't last very long.
But it was, he seemed to ride in like John Wayne. And Gillett was, sort of like his business partner. He tried to buy the club previously, but he didn't have the finance. And then he joined up with Hicks, but it wasn't the greatest of marriages, I don't think, But Liverpool as a city, it was one of those places where, rumours spread quite quickly, And as soon as Benitez started saying to people that they've just gone and tried to interview Klinsmann to look at him replacing him, that was just after, not long after the Champions League. And at the time, Benitez was a very popular manager. He lost that popularity a few years later, but just after 2 Champions League finals in 3 years, he was at the height of his popularity.
Was there ever an issue there with the style with which Benitez played, or were Liverpool fans just happy with results?
I think they were happy with results. There was questions about the style, but I think after Istanbul, he could literally do anything, couldn't he? They had like photographs of him in the street, like the Ayatollah photographs, and Benitez was very popular. But as the years went on, when transfers didn't go well, and that was mainly down, I think, to the finances being stretched because of the debts they were paying off. But you've got to remember, in 2007, they bought Torres, and they took Mascherano on loan. I think they bought Benayoun and Ryan Babel. And then they challenged for the league in 2008, 2009 against Man United. It was like toe-to-toe. So it was, it was felt at the time that he didn't, we could win a Champions League. He was great in the cups, but he didn't have what it takes to maybe take on Ferguson. And when he came out with the facts, which wasn't a rant, it was just a list of facts mainly about Alex Ferguson and his influence with referees, which I think most people agreed with. And we were top of the league then, but I think people pointed to that as the time that Liverpool started to lose the grip on reality almost,
Yeah, quite a few things was said there. And I suppose you mentioned in passing the fallout between Gillett and Hicks as well, because they started off with a sort of a bromance kind of thing. So it was John Wayne and Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy being the more centre of gravity one of the pair, and that soon unravelled. Business is business, and they ended up falling out over this. At what point, and I'm glad that you did that Google search as well. It seems obvious now, you're going to employ somebody else, somebody's going to take over the club. Do a flipping Google search. You'll know you'll know where they're coming from. So they weren't hiding anything in plain view. They may have said things that they weren't going to deliver, but clearly you could see the evidence back there. I wonder at what point the general fan base started feeling uncomfortable. Okay, Rafa Benitez, as you said, said all these things, but did the fans switch at that point? Was that the beginning?
No, I think the spirit of Shankly at the Vanguard, really. We set up in January. We had a meeting in the Sandon pub, which is a historic pub where Everton used to get changed in and then walk over to Anfield because that's where they used to play. And then it was John Holden's pub, who was the founder of both clubs, really, or he financed both clubs. So we had the meetings symbolically, we had it there. We had 350 people turn up, and then we had mass meetings. But even at the height of the protest, there was only, out of 45,000 going to the matches, we only ever had 5,000 on the marches. You can't find anyone now who wasn't on the marches against Hicks and Gillett. But at the time, we only really had 10%. And we'd walk down Ophir Road, past the Sandon and past the ground, the 5,000. It was an impressive, because Liverpool's banners have always been impressive, and people really made an effort for this, and it looked like, a medieval army going to war. That's what it looked like. And it was fantastic. But you still had thousands of people with their arms folded, sitting outside pubs or standing outside pubs, and everyone be saying, come on, join us. But there was a feeling that Liverpool fans didn't protest. That was a Newcastle thing, or, clubs like that protested, and we didn't. So, and there was still a lot of, anger against the spirit of Shankly, at the time. It was very hard to convince people. But you see, we were getting tipped off by Rafa Benitez's right-hand man, a fella called Owen Brown, who was a Tranmere legend, played for Tranmere and various other clubs, but he ended up in Liverpool's community section. And Rafa Benitez took a shine to him and thought, this is the spirit of Scouse. Owen is the real deal. So Owen Brown was telling us what was happening behind the scenes, so we had
so much intrigue. There is so much intrigue in this story. Because we've gone from Liverpool to Everton to Tranmere now. So we've done the gamut of Scouse frontline football teams, I think. Yeah,
it was Shakespearean. We were getting tipped off, and we had journalists like Tony Barrett, who worked for the Times. He works for the club now. But Tony was feeding us stuff, saying, Rafa does, he tried to get this player and they've offered him this player and he's got. So we knew the purse strings were tightened by Hicks and Gillett, but the general fan base were just thinking, why aren't we going for these big players? Why aren't we doing it? So there was a lot of ignorance in that respect, but I think the spirit of Shankly, we were trying to educate people all the time, and no, it's nothing to do with Benitez being a bad manager. It's just that he's had the carpet pulled from under him. He's got I think Benitez actually said, didn't he? It's like trying to. He said, "I've got a decent car. I've got a BMW, but it's like trying to chase a Lamborghini with Chelsea and Man United." And he was talking in terms of finances. Sometimes we might get them on the bends, but on the straights we can't catch them.
I think there's an element of not only Shakespeare but also Greek tragedy, because the tragedy here is that fan bases like that of Liverpool ended up wanting what we really want is a nice multi-millionaire.
And
that for me is the saddest thing of all.
It is, and I think there's still an element of that there now, because people would look back and say, we should have gone with DIC, we should have done this, we should have done that. And looking, we get, hell all the time on social media, because they think we're against Middle Eastern ownership. We've never mentioned Middle Eastern ownership as the Spirits of Shankly, but people just presume that we're against them because we've got the name Spirits of Shankly. We've never said anything about transfers or anything like that, but we're always, how do you think the club's going now? We've lost out on Casado, and it's all based on. It's monopoly money. It's absolutely ridiculous, and Chelsea have overpaid for Casado, and we put a bid in for Lavia, and we'll probably overpay, or Chelsea will overpay for Lavia. It's the world's gone mad, hasn't it? It's not the £10,000 a week now. It's just gone into a different realm completely.
How do you square all this? Because on the one hand, we don't want to get all romantic about the good old days,
No, because it was business then, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, and also, the good old days led to Hillsboroughs, didn't it? They were making a lot. Yeah. There's packed stadiums there, and the money ain't going on the stadiums. No, the money's not going to players. So you wonder in the old days where exactly all right, it was much smaller quantities, but where it was going. So you don't want to romanticize the good old days, especially because for years and years and years, the players were treated as serfs.
Yeah.
See, I get lost in all of this.
Yeah.
Where do we go? What do we want? Are we resigned to just wanting?
When do we want it?
Yeah. Well, are we resigned to wanting a nice billionaire? Is that the limit of now?
Unfortunately, I mean, that's why I'm surprised. I mean, there is a resistance movement in Newcastle because they've been in touch with the spirits of Shankly, about how we fought against the owners and that, because ours is seen as, the way to do it. But as I say, we only had 10% of the fans on board. Newcastle have got a few thousand fans who are refusing to go, but the vast majority, 95% of them, they're made up, aren't they? They were getting dressed up as sheikhs, and I think from a city like that, I was surprised by that. I thought there would have been a lot more resistance, but because the way the Premier League is now and the way it is, just a multinational billionaires playground. Everyone wants a piece of that. That's unfortunately what it is. It's Hollywood, isn't it?
But the difference is that now the prospect of fan ownership is beyond the possibility of fans, because the clubs are just worth so much more now, as your rivals, Manchester United fans, will attest to. They missed their moment when they could have bought the club, or conceivably considered it.
Yeah.
And I suspect that this was the moment, or the last chance, in which the Liverpool fans, as wide and varied as they are right across the world, I think of all the stadiums, when you look at Premier League games, that has the most diverse, in terms of sort of ethnically diverse crowd, I think it is Liverpool, actually.
Probably,
from the Far East, from Africa, from Arab countries, representing in the Copper all around. But this was arguably the last moment, possibly, when you could have bought that club together.
Yeah, I think there was moves to do that, and there's moves, and in our constitution, that's one of our long-term aims. But it just the price of clubs just since then, since 2007, 2010, when Fenway Sports Group bought the club, it's just gone up. It was 300 million then.
They're not clubs anymore, are they? They're suppliers of content for the global entertainment industry. So it's that train has left the station, hasn't it? It's long gone.
It has, and I think it's all about advertising, isn't it? I mean, the one significant thing I remember at the World Cup, the first advert after the World Cup, just gone, was holidays in Saudi Arabia. And that says it all, doesn't it? As soon as the World Cup final finished, holidays in Saudi Arabia, because that's their 2030 vision, they call about, isn't it?
It's like all the clubs are mini Hollywoods. Once upon a time, Hollywood was the purveyor of the American dream. That's how we all, got bought into that. And suddenly these clubs, each of them represents a different Hollywood now to sell a product way beyond our wildest imaginations. But let's get back to this.
But there's always the purity of it that brings us back, isn't it?
Of course.
We always come back to that purity of what's happening on the field.
Yeah.
Well, okay. We'll get to the field. We'll get to the field in a moment. I think there's a few other things to discuss here, because it seems like the one element that we haven't, we talked about players to a certain extent, although we could revert to that in a moment. We talked about the fans, we talked about the owners, but now we should really talk about, you've touched on Rafa Benitez, but this is a moment of managerial appointment as well that will end up being disastrous. I think it's fair to say. You're about to approach 6 months. Or
disappointing. Is disastrous a bit much?
I think it is,
Okay, then let's say
in the
disappointment.
context of the club,
6 months of disappointment, though, is ahead of you.
Yeah. You see, there was somebody who was integral in getting Roy Hodgson to the club, and that was a fellow called Christian Perslow. And allegedly, Christian Perslow was the person who was championing, because he had a couple of senior players who were saying, why don't we go for some stability? And if you look back, if you Google it now, also the Liverpool player Murphy, he was on he was in the media all the time, and he had a thing against Benitez because Benitez sold him as soon as he became manager. So he had a bit of a gripe with Rafa Benitez. So the rumor went round. Whether it's true or not, you'll never tell, because the rumor went round that the senior players had fell out with Benitez because they didn't think he had it in him to win the league. He was too cautious, too defensive. So what they wanted was a period of stability, and that was Roy Hodgson. And Danny Murphy.
Safe pair of hands. Safe pair
of hands. And Danny Murphy had worked with him. He played for him at Fulham, I think. Yeah, he played for him. And I think he must, if you read any reports in that summer, he was recommending Roy Hodgson for the job. And everyone's going, he can't be serious. He's not serious, is he? From Benitez to Roy Hodgson, someone who'd won the Champions League to someone who'd won the Danish league. It's not a very good comparison.
Swedish. I think it's Swedish. Yeah. Sorry to be, finicky about this, but you expect me to say that. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Apology accepted.
We can all be wrong, can't we?
Yeah, we can. No, but
I had absolutely no doubt that Hodgson wasn't right for this job.
Oh,
no doubt at all.
I don't know anything about football, and I could see that he weren't right for this job.
That's no disrespect for him, because he's got a terrific CV. But a few months before, I saw him give a lecture to an audience of coaches in Brazil.
Mm.
And he came across as so brittle and thin-skinned that I thought he's not going to live up well to the things that are going to be thrown at him.
Yeah.
I remember it's one line that stuck out, because he done Inter Milan, not with a great deal of success, I think, and he was saying, in the media and so on, they'll in Milan, in Rio, in London, they'll talk for hours and hours and hours about football, but they don't say anything because I don't know anything, And I thought at that stage, not a hope. Yeah. Not a hope, because you can't dialogue. Later on that same day, there was another coach, João Santana, Brazilian coach. He later briefly took charge of South Africa. And he came up onto the stage and he told a story. He said, I had a cup game against this side that I didn't know. And on the way up, we stopped off at a petrol station. And I got out and just got chatting. And it turned out that one of the petrol pump guys was a supporter of the big rival of the team we're going to play. So I just asked him about the team, and he told me everything I needed to know. And I think Joel said it in response to what Hodgson had said, because the Hodgson line was, only us technocrats can no one else's opinion is valid. And Joel got up and said, well, this petrol pump attendant, was my best scout, So when I heard Hodgson, when he got Liverpool, I thought, that brittleness, he's not going to be able to deal with the likes of Pete.
Well, I mean, he didn't get off to a great start, because he was asked about the protests against the owners. He said, well, they're not going to help, meaning his own position, when he sort of like dismissed them, instead of engaging and saying, well, they've got their opinions and it's up to them. He seemed to be anti the protests, Now, a lot of the fans were anti-protest, because there'd been, lots of arguments in the ground when people would protest it. So we decided not to protest during the matches anymore. So it was after the games, because there'd been so much argument. Get behind the team. Get behind the team. We say, well, there mightn't be a team if we carry on like this. And we were literally a few hours from administration and a points deduction. I don't think fans appreciated that in general,
It doesn't mean anything till it kicks in, does it? It doesn't quite mean anything. Yes. It kicks in. Just apologies there, Tim. The thing that I was going to mention with regards to this, it seems to me as if, from what I've read, and thank you as well for you suggested a brilliant article on this for us to do users' homework. From what I've read, Roy Hodgson didn't get the club, arguably didn't get Scousers, the history of Liverpool as a frontline protest community. Actually,
this is going to be my question. Do you think that to be a Liverpool coach, you've got to be kind of almost a little bit populist, left-leaning.
Yeah, I think that helps. But I mean, I think that helps because obviously that's Shankly built the club, and that's the way he was. Even though he was notoriously didn't like politicians, did he? But he was political with a small p.
He only liked Jimmy Cagney, I think.
Yeah, and Joe Louis, the boxer. But yeah, especially with Klopp now. Klopp is the antithesis of Hodgson, isn't he? Really, of his attitude and I think it helps. Nobody knew Benitez's politics. Nobody knew Dalglish's politics, really. So I don't think it's a complete hindrance, But I think, especially to come out and say, don't say anything. Don't say anything about the protest. No comment, But don't say, oh, it's not going to be helpful that of the protest. And, that's before the first game, So that put everyone's backs up straight away, But there wasn't this... there was this myth that everyone was against Hodgson. They weren't. People were willing to give him a chance. And it was only as after-match comments that people started to say, what match is he watching? And there was the game we're talking about, the 1-1, he said he thought Liverpool were exceptional, even though Arsenal completely outplayed us for most of the game. And then when we lost to Everton at Goodison 2-0, he said we were, we played fantastic. It was the best performance of the season. We just lost 2-0 to Everton. That was the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back.
For a lot of fans, at least. Okay, let's talk about this match then. So it's August the 15th, 2010, first match of the season. In fact, you've just come, as we speak now, you've just come away with the 1-1 draw at Chelsea, haven't you? So it's kind of like repeating itself, history repeating itself all over again, except at Stamford Bridge rather than at Anfield. What do you remember, though, about the match? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it was Arsenal dominated the game, and it was Joe Cole's debut. And I remember him getting sent off just before. It was a terrible tackle. I remember it was a lunging tackle up by the Anfield Road end. So I was on the Kop, so I didn't get a great view of it, but I remember seeing it on the television later on, and it was a straight red, and there's no argument about that, But Arsenal dominated the game, but I think if you look at the highlights of the game, and I looked at them recently, Gerrard is everywhere. Gerrard's all over the place, and he's obviously trying his utmost to get a good result for the manager. It's as simple as that, I think.
So it was an Arsenal midfield without Fabregas, who was the main man. And I came back to renew visa or something like that just around this time. I remember going to Arsenal and seeing Fabregas. I think it was against Braga in the Champions League, and it just blew my mind. And Wiltshire was just coming up as the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and the two of them, they just passed and passed and passed, and it was wonderful to watch. So the absence of Fabregas maybe opens the door for Gerrard to try and dominate the midfield.
Yeah, certainly. That's what it looked like from what I can remember and looking at the highlights. But we had our midfield was okay, but I think we were lacking in places. Torres I think he was on the bench, but we had Ngog up front. He was never going to be set the world alight. Midfield of Mascherano, quality player. Joe Cole and Steven Gerrard. So not a bad midfield, not a bad midfield at all. But it was for your opening game of the season, even though Arsenal, were a very good team, it looked like we were just trying to defend against them. It didn't look like we had any ambition. Maybe that was because of our weakness up front at the time, But Ngog did score a brilliant goal, I remember, in the Kop end, top corner. But yeah, and then there was a terrible mistake by Pepe Reina, who didn't tend to make mistakes, who fumbled the ball into his own net, But a disappointing opening game, really, on Liverpool's point of view. If it had been away from home, it would have been a great result. But
Or if Pepe Reina hadn't fumbled that goal, how different would the narrative have been?
Yeah, possibly. Possibly Roy Hodgson might have got off to a flying start. You never know, and we wouldn't have been, in the bottom 2 after the Everton game.
Yeah, that's
where we ended up.
Yeah, that's got to hurt. When you look back at a game like this and you think first game of the season, thrown away 2 points immediately, it's going to put pressure on the manager one way or another. Yeah. What gets me, we talked about Joe Cole getting sent off. And by the way, the highlights of this match on YouTube, I would not recommend them because I don't know who edited them. I mean, that's the worst editing highlights I've ever. I didn't realize you could get it so wrong. It starts off a move and then it cuts to somewhere else. I'm like, what happened to that move?
It doesn't show either goal, does it? I got the goals from fans on YouTube.
It's absolutely mad. Anyway, that's another story. Yeah. But Joe Cole that you mentioned there was always seen as being Roy Hodgson's man. But what amuses me about this, when you were talking about the chief executive earlier on, he styled himself as being the Fernando Torres of finance. That made me laugh, but not as much as the fans' view was that he ended up being the Joe Cole of finance rather than the Fernando. That made me chuckle so much.
You see, that's what allegedly that's what he'd said to somebody at a Liverpool dinner. I'm the Fernando Torres of finance, But the Spirits of Shankly actually had a meeting with him, and it was an incredible meeting because he turned up in the pub in Liverpool city centre. We had all our committee.
I heard about this. I did hear about this. Yes.
He didn't park, and we heard off Rafa's right-hand man why he didn't park next to the pub. He said he didn't want us to be jealous of his car. So he got dropped off, and he came in. And he was a diminutive man. He had Cuban heels on. And he started swearing like a docker. And we thought, what's he doing this for? And it was obviously thinking, and he also called us the SOS. Oh, yeah, he said to people back at the club, oh, yeah, sons of strikers. They must all be ex-militants, and all that. And we had a vast array of people involved in it. We had ordinary people who worked in factories. We had solicitors, we had lawyers, it was a cross section. We had people like myself, it was a total cross section of Liverpool fans, really.
This is so reminiscent of that, of that panorama from '64. When the BBC reporter in front of the cop saying, the Duke of Wellington, I don't know what they do to the enemy, but by God, they frighten me. But now the fella is not a BBC reporter. He's an executive of the club, for crying out.
Yeah. And he was saying, I'm the same as you. I'm a fan. I've done this, and I'm a fan. I want to, I'm the same as you. I'm the fucking same as you. And you go, why is he swearing? Because at meetings we wouldn't swear.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a fan like you, and he's, I believe he was, we surreptitiously taped the meeting, but we had a meeting later on, and whether we should release it to the public, because we agreed that we would produce minutes and he would produce minutes, and we'd agree on the minutes. And his minutes were completely different to the reality. So we said, we can't put your minutes out. And we sent him our minutes. And he said, you can't put that out. He said, well, that's what you said. That's what you said. And we've got it on tape. We should have really released it, but, we didn't. We felt as if we hadn't had his agreement to tape it, so we didn't release it,
I think you've got to hold the moral high ground if, you're the supporter here. And funny enough, when you said that he described you lot as sons of strikers, I couldn't figure out why he was describing you lot as the sons of centre forwards. I just could not figure it out. Honestly, genuinely. I get it now. I get it.
Yeah. But he was actually, the players who he might have took counsel of ended up calling him Forrest Gump, because he was turning up at the training session with not his suit on, but his tracksuit, and he became a laughing stock, He became a laughing stock. And it wasn't really, he didn't get any investment. He was brought in by RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, to get investment into the club so they could pay the debts off Hicks and Gillett, but he never got the investment. It was Martin Broughton who came in a while later, and he was the one. He was old school, British establishment, and he was not going to let any John Wayne take a British establishment to the cleaners, And it was Martin Broughton really who basically arranged investment from and took bids in. And I think Perslow was reportedly said, well, he didn't want John Henry, Tom Werner. He didn't want their bid. He wanted another bid, So he was all excited when the court case went to the High Court and Liverpool won and Hicks and Gillett lost. But then within a few weeks, he was out himself on gardening leave, because they knew he hadn't supported them,
This whole thing ended up in the High Court?
It did, yeah. Because Hicks and Gillett were saying that they couldn't sell to John Henry and Tom Werner because they had certain agreements with the club, and the High Court, it was an American court had ruled that it was illegal to sale, and the British establishment just joined together and went, that means nothing. A Texas court means nothing. So John Wayne went with his tail between his legs.
It's not his real name, by the way.
No, it's Marion Morrison, I think.
Yeah, of course it was.
Yeah.
Well done for remembering that one. Oh my goodness. Do you remember the goals there? You said, no, we've mentioned the goals actually, as exciting as they were.
Yeah, it was a great goal. So it was like, it promised something, but we were used to Fernando Torres, who was like a magnificent player for a couple of years, until he got his injuries. Torres was fantastic, and he had fantastic songs. It was the rebirth of Liverpool as a football club, and it was fantastic, and then the Hicks and Gillett. Then we found out what the finances were like, because that was the honeymoon period when they bought Torres, and they had Mascherano on loan.
He'd had a great World Cup, hadn't he, Torres? As I remember, he'd had a great World Cup, came to Liverpool, and he was just on fire the moment he stepped on that pitch, And had a good line in hair dye, obviously.
Yeah, it was Beatlemania. It was Beatlemania. It was Beatlemania when
everybody's going around in blonde hair.
Yeah.
Even the black scousers in Liverpool 8, hey, look at my blonde hair. No, I'm only kidding. I don't know.
It was a hastily released book on Torres, and it was Beatlemania in the city centre, And, I'm sure some of the other players weren't too happy about it, because Liverpool didn't have that. They'd never had that George Best type figure, and this superstar. Even when Barnes and Dalglish were at the height, they'd never been superstars like that.
It was always the collective machine. I remember when I was at college and I started meeting people from all around the country. This is in the mid '80s, when Liverpool were best team in the land by a mile. I remember just the real bitterness from Liverpool fans about the coverage that United always got. The glamorous United superstar.
The flamboyant team from down the East Lancs Road. Whether that was reality or perception, you'd have to get an academic to look at that on coverage. But it always seemed to be that we would call the Red Machine, whereas the United team of the '60s was the flamboyant Cavaliers, So some, a lot of fans did resent that,
the finances of it. I often wonder, was there an alternative? Could we have found a different way of doing this? You mentioned Mascherano. Mascherano came to Brazil before he went to England. He had that. Him and Tevez, that third-party ownership thing with West Ham. They were being parked at West Ham to try and the money that took them to Brazil, that was another. Well, it looks like it was a money laundering operation.
Yeah.
By with that money going from a Russian oligarch, a kind of competitor to Abramovich, and that's how he was trying to get his way in.
Yeah,
and the figures just didn't add up. What they were spending, and it became under investigation in what Corinthians were doing by the branch of the police that look into organised crime, and I went to interview them, and they said, they kept on sitting down talking to the people behind the Corinthians, the money men with the money coming from Russia, and the thing that they got from them all the time is, why are you doing this to us? We're mates with Tony Blair. And it's like that got them a get out of jail card on every. We're mates with Tony Blair.
Yeah.
If we're all right by him, why are you moaning at us?
We've been to that island. Island that we can't mention.
And so it does seem that this is the spirit of the age, isn't it? Where billionaires welcome.
Yeah.
And Colonel Gaddafi, obviously. That aside,
obviously.
Yeah, well, yes. That aside, should we spend a moment in sort of like thinking about the spirit of Shankly now? What role does it now have at Liverpool? Now the sort of Hicks and Gillett era is long over. The Fenway era seems to be coming to an end, but who knows where those discussions are at. What role does SOS have now?
Well, if you look on social media, we should be getting FSG in a room and getting them to spend more money. But in reality, our role is supporter welfare, really. So after the debacle of Paris, Champions League final in Paris, we had representatives going to the French Senate talking about fans' experiences. So it's about support. Yeah, and proved right,
crucially, yeah.
And so we basically took on the French government with the Spirit of Shankly and other fans and the Football Supporters Europe, and it made the press for like 2 months in France because the government was under pressure and the sports minister was under pressure, and basically we're there as a thorn on the side of UEFA as well, because there was massive problems with Man City. This final in June just gone had massive problems, and they've been in touch with us saying, can we get a dossier together, and how did you do it? So looking advice off the Spirit of Shankly, So, but basically, it's about trying to keep the owners accountable, so they can't try and put prices up enormously, and they can't try and do bits and bobs. But we do not get involved in footballing matters because we leave that to Jurgen Klopp and his backroom staff, but if you look on the internet, it's all our fault that we haven't bought Caicedo, or we haven't bought Lavia, which by the time this goes out, we might have bought somebody, I don't know, but they think we're in the boardroom with FSG and we're not. There's a supporters board set up now, which is diverse. It's got the women's representatives from the women's team, disabled groups, cop-outs from the LGBT community. So it's a wide range of different people,
So it's an attempt to regulate the owners from below, in as far as you can do that.
We're in the Articles of Association now, the supporters board, but the Spirit of Shankly is separate to them. But we've got 10 representatives on us. On the supporters board is 16 people, and we've got 10 of those reps on there. So we set it up really, and that came after the European Super League fiasco, and John Henry made that apology in the darkened room, like a funeral parlor, wasn't it? And he made that apology, and then they must have said, let's engage the supporters more, because we didn't realise what was happening. I mean, that was Liverpool and Man United were at the forefront of that, weren't they? Because they'd seen what happened to Netflix, haven't they, and Amazon Prime, and that thought, paying for
it hasn't gone away.
Well, it hasn't gone away.
Let's just be mindful of that one. Tim, how much of a loss was Caicedo's apparent rejection of Liverpool to the club? Because I would have thought of all the signings, and they've made some good ones over the summer, Caicedo was the one they really needed.
Well, I think he always wanted Chelsea. And as I think there are sentimental reasons.
Sorry, Tim. Didn't he want Arsenal before that in January?
He wanted the big club.
Yeah.
Which is Liverpool.
What was Arsenal in for him in January? But when there was time to do it, I think there was a sentiment. Because as he was growing up, he watched a lot of N'Golo Kante at Chelsea.
Yeah.
So I think that there was a sentimental thing for him there. In purely footballing terms, which one would you have chosen? Would you rather go to a Chelsea who are still in that turmoil, still, trying to find their way, or would you go to Liverpool? But is Klopp a busted flush now? How much more has he got in him? I suppose that's a lovely problem to have, isn't it?
Well, I think he's the nearest thing to Shankly, and I think this could be Klopp's second-grade team with a couple of additions. I mean, I don't know if you saw the game against Chelsea, but McAllister and Szoboszlai, they look fantastic.
I was going to say about Szoboszlai, you know that you owe me and Tim a favour on him.
Oh, right,
yeah,
right.
you do, because
you recommended Liverpool, did you?
No, we taught the world to sing.
Yeah, we taught the world to sing the song that you lot of the cops should be singing about Szoboszlai, because when he initially came over, there was this issue about how do you pronounce his name? How do you pronounce his name? So we did a World Football Phone-in where we threw out to the listeners to come up with a song to remember Szoboszlai by. And the winner of that conversation was Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer. So he will forever be known as Szoboszlai.
Perfect.
Honestly, it works. Trust me.
Take that to the cop, Pete. Take it to the cop.
Yeah,
I'll put that on one of the forums and get.
Tell him it works in terms of remembering how to pronounce his name.
Maybe you can get to one of the end of the lines, la la la, woo, and then get back to it. Why not?
Why not among something? But
that's very good, very good.
But that links us very sweetly to your other hat now, your musical hat, because again, on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, we always look at the charts of the day and the context in which this football match was held was with what I consider. Now, actually, let's get Tim's thoughts on this, if you don't mind, first of all, Pete, because as everybody knows by now, Tim is an absolute dinosaur when it comes to looking at the official musical charts of any era.
They just bought me, it was Father's Day in Brazil yesterday. They just bought me an Alexa just to take the piss out of me. That's what she'll probably turn on now. I am a dinosaur. I didn't get beyond really the top 10 with this.
Are you kidding?
I tried. But it's no 1966, is it?
Well, no, that's not the comparison, though, is it? As an artist,
it's always the comparison at all times, everywhere. The comparison is always with the charts in 1966, and everything else loses.
Yeah,
that's why I've been listening to the podcast where you talk about 1966, saying it was probably the best, the best chart that you'd ever seen. That's why I said that. Yeah,
I'm really surprised, actually. I genuinely am really surprised, because I thought you and I would get this, Pete, because what strikes me, 2010, there's some great music in this chart, absolutely fantastic in my view. 15th of August, the 21st of August, 2010. There's a lot of electronic dance music, which doesn't appeal to everybody, and I get that.
It's that horrible, unimaginative orchestral production sound.
That aside, Tim, I mean, I don't mind some of the electronic dance music if there is some originality to it. But that aside, this is a chart, remember, that you've got absolutely amazing pop hits, like All Time Low, I think, is a standard now by Wanted, which is at number 8.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's a standard, mate.
Really?
I would have thought so. And the other one that's in this chart that strikes me straight away is Alicia Keys' Empire State of Mind, which is a version of Jay-Z's original, 2010, being 9 years after 9/11. But having said that, the song is now perennial at the time of, in September, if you're in New York, etc. That's way down the charts at number 48. But I
didn't get that far. I gave up. I gave up the top 40.
Okay, let me Let me keep it to the top 40. It gets better generally as charts go. They do get better as you go further down. Black Eyed Peas at number 53 with I Got a Feeling. Arguably, that was their version of, electronic dance music. And it became something of an iconic tune. Kanan, this young kid who was, I'm pretty sure, was a refugee from Somalia. I've interviewed him a couple of times from the war in Somalia, comes out with this, and when I interviewed him several times, he was like trying to break through. He suddenly did with this amazing tune, which is something of an anthem at number 55, Waving Flag. I won't talk about Tiny Temper. He can talk for himself, but it is original UK rap, stroke, grime, whatever you want to call it. It's very original compared to all the others around him at the time. And then there's, some shit in the charts as well. I won't lie. There is some shit in the charts. Where should we begin with that?
Quite a lot, actually.
Go on. Where do you want to begin with this?
Well, I mean, I'd say I did listen to top 40. I think the Eminem track, Not Afraid's okay. Just Be Good to Green was one of my favourites with Professor Green and Lily Allen.
I didn't like that, you see. Because
I like that. Because it's got the soul sample in it, isn't it?
It has, but
that's what I like about it.
Do you not think the Beats International was a better rendition of the SOS?
Possibly,
bands?
yeah.
I thought theirs was much better. I couldn't understand what he added to it. He's not the greatest rapper in the world, but that's just my feeling.
Hey Soul Sister by Train.
I thought that was decent. Yeah,
that's quite decent.
Yeah.
And then a couple of Plan B tracks are okay.
I thought they were very good, actually.
Yeah.
Tim, you Plan B?
No, I like him. And there's a kind of cinematic feel to some of his stuff that I enjoy.
I'll tell you what I enjoyed here that I didn't expect to enjoy. In retrospect, like it always is sometimes with music, at the time where you hear it, you're in a certain place and time, and you haven't got time for nonsense. I always thought JLS was crap. And they are kind of crappish, but The Club is Alive, the idea of taking The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music to say The Club is Alive with the Sound of Music, I thought was quite clever. And I thought, hasn't anybody else ever done that? But it is a shitty boy band tune. I'm not taking away from that. And then that's at number 32. And below that, 33, Find Your Love by Drake. I actually think you've got to give him props on that one, mate. That is a proper tune.
Yeah.
With lyrics, and I thought, this is a decent chart. This is a really decent chart. If we can scrape away,
but not compared to 66.
I'm comparing it to 1956. Thank you very much. It stands up well.
But the comparison with 66 is interesting, I think, because what's one of the big changes is technology, isn't it? And if you go back to 66 and 76, in order to make music, you are dependent on bringing people together and having that interplay inside a band. And the Beatles, I mean, I don't have a religion. The closest thing I've got is the Beatles, and they would never have been as good as solo artists as they were together.
Oh no, it's a different.
The interplay between Lennon and Mac, with two other greats in there, it creates, and the dynamic of cooperation and competition inside the band just pushes them to height after height after height. But then, and you see this, I think, most clearly when hip hop starts, you get the potential to make music on your own.
No,
and I think
it's not on your own. I think the image is that it's on your own, but it's not on your own.
But you can control the production on your own in a way that you can't with a band. I mean, that came across very clearly to me with the group that come out of Detroit. With one of them was Kevin Sanderson and so on. There were a group of them together.
In a city. I went to their studio in Detroit.
Right, yeah.
I saw how it worked.
There were 3 or 4 of them who came through together, and had it been 66, they would have worked collectively. But because this is later and they've got the technology, that enables each one to work on his or her own solo project, and you lose the dynamic that you have, as I'm sure Pete enjoyed and at times despaired, inside a band. And I think that's one of the things.
I think that's vital for the group. And if you look at, if you saw Get Back, the Beatles documentary, absolutely, I've watched it 3 or 4 times now, but the dynamics there, because you can tell by then it's McCartney's group, isn't it? Even though Lennon was always regarded as the leader, and they have that discussion in the cafe. You don't know who's getting taped. We said, "You're the leader." He went, "No, you're the leader. I'm not the leader. You are." And they started arguing about who's the leader. But the person who was almost being bullied then was George Harrison. But if you look at Spotify now, George Harrison, he's had his revenge from the grave, really, because Here Comes the Sun on Spotify is downloaded the most Beatles track. Wow. It's 1 billion downloads, whereas the nearest one is Come Together, 632.
Wow.
Million.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand why. Here Comes the Sun has got a universality about it. Yeah. Once you start talking about, the celestial beings, and everybody wakes up and loves the sunshine, and
or it's been in a film.
Yeah.
Arguably, yeah. And
or an advert for something.
Yeah.
The acoustic nature of it doesn't harm either. And I'm really fascinated, and we've only got about 5 or 10 minutes of this podcast to go. So I am fascinated about what you and Tim were discussing just then, Pete, about the dynamics of a band. And I've been in bands, and it's very different from my wife's experience, who's a solo artist. In fact, just before we came on, and I was telling her about this chart, she said, "Look, you don't need to tell me about what makes a pop hit. I know, because I've sung backing singing for half of these people. I am the voice," she said to me. "I am the voice of Kylie Minogue's, Can't Get You Out of My Head. That's my voice in this. I know what it takes to make a pop hit." In a band, you never know, because of the that's a completely different thing. That's exactly it. It's so dependent upon what everybody brings to the table and how it all sits together harmonically.
Yeah. You see, when we released Groovy Train, we didn't know that was going to be a big hit. And I read recently, going through my archive, somebody writing a review of a live performance by us said, if this is the ultimate in a group getting together and deciding what the ingredients should be for a hit. But it wasn't like that at all. It was just purely organic. And we used drum loops from a fella called Sam Severs, who was in third base in New York.
I remember them. I remember third base. Whoa!
And he was fantastic. And he ended up in a group called Downtown Science. And we went on tour with Big Audio Dynamite in America. And as we were doing a sound check, they were on tour with us as well. So it was Downtown Science on, then The Farm, then Big Audio Dynamite. And Sam Severs was listening to our sound check, and he come up to us and went, "I recognise a few of them drum beats." And we said, "Sam, how much do we owe you?" And he went, "No." He said, I'm flattered. He said, "I'm flattered." He said, because he obviously got them off somewhere as well, probably. But when we released All Together Now, we had no idea it had this longevity. And a year later, we released a track called Love See No Colour, which I think is as good.
Yeah. I remember that one.
As good as All Together Now, but it got nowhere. You just couldn't tell. Time and place is very important,
But I agree with you that you can't tell where it's going to get in the charts. But I was thinking more, you don't even know how this track's going to sound, how it's going to end up, as it were. No. First of all, a band seems like a much more live and direct.
Most of our arguments, Dotun, weren't over music. They were over Subutio. Because that's all, honestly, because just imagine, what studios are like. Your bass player puts a bass line down, your drummer's putting a drum track down. You're not always in the same room. You might be in the same room to do the guides, and then everyone individually goes and does their own stuff, So in the meantime, instead of, wandering off, we decided to have Subito competitions, which obviously caused murder, as it
Table
always
football.
does.
It's
I
table
was
football.
always
My perfect cousin. Yeah,
That's it. Yeah,
that's
I
the
was
one.
always Argentina.
Obviously.
And-
You lot
but, we actually had a Subito team named after us.
Argentina versus the rest of the world. Sorry, what was the Subito
Yeah,
team?
Subito got in touch with us because we did a lot of photo shoots playing Subito, and Subito got in touch with us and said, you're giving us brilliant advertising here. What can we do? And we said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, what about if we had a team with your colour? You can choose the colours. So we chose the Rastafarian colours, to go on Subito team.
Were you Argentina so Alf Ramsey could call you the farm animals?
No, but he could. Yeah. I was listening to that, and it was brilliant the way, imagine Alf Ramsey swearing. That was just had me in ball.
Well, there is the famous "Welcome to Scotland, Mr. Ramsey."
Yeah.
Must be fucking joking. Brilliant.
I have a friend who's a photographer. I have a friend who's a paparazzi photographer. He doesn't like to admit this now, but he, when in the earlier days, he admitted to me that he'd been sworn at by every member of the royal family, including the Queen. And
brilliant!
He was hiding in the long grass at Sandringham. He was hiding in the long grass at Sandringham, and literally behind him, he has.
Brilliant. Well, I've been sworn at by a Sex Pistol.
Oh well, that's standard.
It was British Electric Foundation, which is Martin Ware's from Heaven 17, his side group, and we went on tour together. And Glenn was asleep in the dressing room, but there was someone outside wanted to come and get an autograph. So I knocked on the door, opened the door, went, "Fuck off!" And then brilliant. A Sex Pistol sworn at me.
The
one who was thrown out for liking the Beatles. It just gets better.
Of course.
Which you say he denies that.
And he started a group called the Rich Kids after that, and I went and saw them at the Vortex on Dean Street, or Wardour Street, wherever it was, on the corner of Oxford Street. And I noticed that he still had on all his kit, he still had the Sex Pistols, just so that you would know.
Yeah.
I've interviewed him since because it came out of that Blink Country Western album, and the only thing wrong with it is that he sings in it with an American accent. He didn't even know that. He said, "Oh, do I? I didn't even realise that, because he talks like this normally."
Yeah.
And but it was a decent album, I've got to say. But hey, he's missed his moment. As we've missed our moment, it's that time when I have to thank you so much for being a guest.
Surely Roy Hodgson, we can slag him off more. No one actually chanted against Roy Hodgson, by the way. But there was one chant when the Cop was singing Hodgson for England.
Yeah, I heard this.
That was the only real...
which is the irony that you'd expect from the Cop and all. But if you saw Roy Hodgson at the age of 76 taking on a player trying to get the ball from under his feet the other day,
that was brilliant.
You look like, "I'm going to nut you, mate. I'm going to do that one more time, and I'm going to nut you." We love it. It's core football, by the way. Beginning of a new season. Great to have you kick it off for us, mate. Thank you, Pete.
Okay, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed it, as usual.